The thunder of gunfire echoed across Main Street as Vaughn Daniels dove behind an overturned wagon, his hand already drawing the Colt revolver from his holster. It was supposed to be a simple day in Muskogee, Oklahoma Territory, 1881, just a supply run before heading back to his ranch, but the territorial marshal's pursuit of the Blackwell Gang had turned the dusty street into a battlefield. "Stay down," Vaughn shouted to a terrified shopkeeper who had the misfortune of being caught in the crossfire. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass all around them. Through the chaos, Vaughn spotted two children huddled in the doorway of the general store, directly in the line of fire. Without hesitation, he broke from cover, sprinting toward them as revolvers barked and rifles cracked. He reached the children, pushing them through the doorway to safety just as a searing pain tore through his side. Another bullet struck his shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the dirt. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the sky above Muskogee, impossibly blue and peaceful against the violence below. The sound came first, soft, rhythmic turning of pages. Then sensation, the dull throb of pain in his side and shoulder, the crisp feel of clean sheets against his skin, and the unfamiliar softness of a proper mattress beneath him. Vaughn's eyelids felt as heavy as anvils, but he forced them open, blinking against the golden afternoon light streaming through lace curtains. Beside his bed sat a woman, her copper hair catching the sunlight as she turned another page of her book. Her profile was delicate but strong, with a straight nose, determined chin, and lips slightly pursed in concentration. She wore a simple blue dress, modest yet becoming, and seemed utterly absorbed in her reading. "Am I dead?" His voice emerged as a rasp, startling the woman. Her book tumbled to her lap as she turned, revealing eyes the color of summer sage. "Far from it, Mr. Daniels, though not for lack of trying." She recovered quickly, setting her book aside and reaching for a glass of water on the bedside table. "You're in my home. I'm Clara Calloway." Vaughn attempted to sit up, but pain lanced through his torso, forcing a grunt from his lips. "Please don't move," Clara said, her voice softening as she helped position the glass at his lips. "Dr. Patterson removed 2 bullets from you 3 days ago. You've been feverish until this morning." The water was cool and sweet against his parched throat. 3 days? "Yes. The marshal brought you here after the shooting." The hotel was full of travelers, and the doctor's office too small for extended care. She set the empty glass down. "I have a spare bedroom and some nursing experience from the war." Vaughn studied her face. She was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, but there was a quiet wisdom in her eyes that spoke of experiences beyond her years. "The children?" he asked, memories of the shootout flooding back. "Safe. Thanks to you." Clara's expression softened. "The whole town knows what you did." Running out into that crossfire to save the Wilkinson children was either the bravest or most foolish thing anyone's seen in Muskogee. Vaughn closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over him. Glad to hear it. Opening them again, he looked around the room's simple but comfortable furnishings, walls painted a pale yellow, and shelves lined with more books than he'd ever seen outside a proper library. "You like to read," he observed, nodding toward the volume in her lap. A small smile touched her lips. "It's my greatest indulgence. This one is The Woman in White." Perhaps not the most cheerful bedside reading, but engrossing nonetheless. "Never been much for books myself," Vaughn admitted. "Ranch work doesn't leave much time for reading." "The Diamond D Ranch," Clara said. "The marshal told me. Said you've made quite a success of it these past 5 years." Vaughn felt a twinge of suspicion, a habit formed from years of living in a territory where a man's business was his own. Marshall talks too much. He was merely explaining why a respectable widow should open her home to a strange man. Clara replied evenly. "Even one who saves children." The word widow registered, and Vaughn noticed for the first time the simple gold band on her left hand. "My apologies, Mrs. Calloway. I didn't mean, no offense taken, Mr. Daniels." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "You should rest now. I'll bring some broth later if you're feeling up to it." As she moved toward the door, Vaughn found himself not wanting her to leave just yet. "What happened to the Blackwell Gang?" he asked quickly. Clara paused at the doorway. "2 dead, 3 captured. The marshal says they'll hang before month's end." Her expression darkened momentarily. They killed Mr. Peterson at the bank before the shooting started. Vaughn nodded solemnly. He'd known Peterson, a decent man with a young family. Mrs. Calloway, he called as she began to close the door. Thank you. The smile she gave him then was small but genuine, illuminating her face in a way that made Vaughn's breath catch despite his injuries. You're welcome, Mr. Daniels. Now rest. As the door closed, Vaughn settled back against the pillows, the pain in his wounds oddly distant as he replayed the image of Clara Calloway reading beside his bed, sunlight in her copper hair. Over the next week, Vaughn's strength gradually returned under Clara's attentive care. Dr. Patterson, a gruff older man with surprisingly gentle hands, visited daily to change his bandages and check for infection. You're healing well, Daniels, the doctor announced one morning after examining the wounds. Mrs. Calloway has a way with nursing that puts even my best assistants to shame. Clara, who was changing the water in a basin nearby, dismissed the compliment with a shake of her head. Basic skills every woman should know, doctor. Especially out here. Humph. Basic skills that saved this cowboy's life, Dr. Patterson countered, packing his medical bag. Another day of fever, and we might have lost him. After the doctor left, Clara helped Vaughn sit up against the headboard, a task that no longer left him gasping with pain. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting patterns on the quilt covering his legs. The doctor exaggerates, she said, adjusting a pillow behind his back. Your own constitution did most of the work. I don't think so, Vaughn replied, catching her gaze. I remember bits and pieces from those first days. You reading to me when the fever was worst. Cooling my forehead. I heard your voice even when everything else was just darkness. A faint blush colored Clara's cheeks, and she busied herself with straightening items on the bedside table. It helps patients to hear a human voice when they're fighting fever. That's all. What did you read to me? Vaughn asked, genuinely curious. The memory of her voice had been a lifeline during those hazy, pain-filled hours. Clara hesitated before answering. Poetry mostly. Tennyson. Some Wordsworth. My husband always said poetry speaks to the soul, even when the mind is elsewhere. The mention of her husband hung in the air between them. Vaughn had wondered about the man, but hadn't felt it his place to ask. He had good taste, your husband. Yes, Clara said simply, her fingers unconsciously touching her wedding band. Robert was a schoolteacher before the war. He loved literature. How long has he been gone? Vaughn asked gently. Clara's eyes took on a faraway look. 4 years this October. Pneumonia took him after a harsh winter. He was only 30. I'm sorry. Thank you. She seemed to shake off the melancholy, her practical nature reasserting itself. Now, can you manage some real food today? Mrs. Hamilton from next door brought over a chicken pie that smells divine. Vaughn smiled, grateful for both the change of subject and the prospect of something more substantial than broth. I could eat a whole steer right about now. Clara laughed, a genuine sound that brightened the room. Let's start with chicken and work our way up. That evening, after eating more food than he'd thought possible in his weakened state, Vaughn convinced Clara to let him sit in the parlor rather than return immediately to bed. The small house revealed itself to be modestly but comfortably furnished, with a piano in one corner and bookshelves lining every available wall. Did you grow up in Muskogee? Vaughn asked as Clara poured tea from a delicate porcelain pot, clearly one of her prized possessions. She handed him a cup, settling into a chair across from him. No, Robert and I came here from Pennsylvania after the war. He had tuberculosis, not severe, but his doctor recommended the drier climate. A sad smile crossed her face. Ironic that he survived that only to succumb to pneumonia. And you stayed on after he passed? Clara nodded. I had nowhere else to go, really. My parents died when I was young, and my only sister married and moved to California. She gestured around the room. Besides, this became home. I teach at the school now, taking over Robert's position. Between that and giving piano lessons to a few students, I manage. Vaughn watched her over the rim of his teacup. In the lamplight, her features seemed softer, more vulnerable than during the day when she efficiently went about caring for him. What about you, Mr. Daniels? She asked. The Diamond D is one of the most successful ranches in the territory, but no one seems to know much about its owner. Vaughn shifted slightly, his shoulder twinging. Not much to tell. Came west from Tennessee after the war with nothing but a horse and the clothes on my back. Worked as a drover, then foreman on a few ranches, saved every penny. When the territory opened up for settlement, I staked my claim on good grazing land and started with 30 head of cattle. And now, over 500 head, 3,000 acres. He said it without pride, just stating facts. 8 men working for me full-time. All alone on such a large operation? Clara asked, her question innocent but perceptive. Vaughn set down his cup. My foreman Sam handles things when I'm not there. As for family, he trailed off, memories surfacing of a wife buried beneath a simple cross on a Tennessee hillside, a casualty of the war's privations. It's just me. Clara seemed to sense the weight behind his words and didn't press further. Instead, she rose and moved to the piano. Would you mind some music? I find it helps settle the mind before sleep. Please, Vaughn said, grateful for her intuition. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced ease, drawing forth a melody that was both melancholy and beautiful. Vaughn closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, carrying away the persistent ache of his wounds and the deeper pain of old losses. When she finished, the silence felt charged with something neither of them was ready to name. You play beautifully, he said quietly. Thank you. Clara stood, smoothing her skirt in that habitual gesture he'd come to recognize. We should get you back to bed. Doctor's orders. As she helped him navigate the short hallway back to the guest room, her hand supporting his elbow, Vaughn found himself acutely aware of her proximity, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the strength in her slender frame as she steadied him. I've imposed on you long enough, he said as she helped him sit on the edge of the bed. I should return to my ranch soon. Clara's expression turned stern. Dr. Patterson says at least another week before you even think about riding. Those wounds need more time to heal properly. I can't stay here indefinitely, Mrs. Calloway. I have responsibilities, and I have a responsibility to ensure you don't undo all our hard work by being stubborn. She interrupted, handing him a clean nightshirt. Your foreman visited yesterday while you were napping. He assured me everything is well in hand at the Diamond D. Sam was here. Vaughn felt a mixture of gratitude and annoyance that his second-in-command had come to town without waking him. He brought your mail and some clothes, Clara said, gesturing to a small trunk in the corner that hadn't been there that morning. He said to tell you that the spring calving is proceeding well and that you should stop being a damned hero and heal up proper. She blushed slightly at repeating the mild profanity. Despite himself, Vaughn chuckled. Sounds like Sam. He cares about you, Clara observed. They all do. The men who work for you, I mean. He spoke very highly of you as an employer. They're good men, Vaughn said simply, uncomfortable with praise. Clara nodded and moved toward the door. I'll leave you to change. Call if you need anything. After she left, Vaughn sat for a long moment, thinking about the woman whose house he'd unexpectedly come to occupy. Clara Calloway was unlike any woman he'd encountered in his years in the territory, educated, independent, and possessed of a quiet strength that commanded respect. She'd built a life for herself after losing her husband, when many women would have returned east or remarried quickly out of necessity. And she was beautiful not in the flashy way of the saloon girls or the polished manner of the wealthy ranchers' wives, but with a natural elegance that seemed unaware of itself. It had been a long time since Vaughn had noticed such things about a woman, and longer still since he'd cared to. Shaking off these thoughts, he changed into the nightshirt and eased himself into bed, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. Outside his window, an owl called softly into the night, and somewhere distant, a dog barked. The sounds of Muskogee settling into evening were oddly comforting after years of the profound silence that enveloped his remote ranch at night. As he drifted toward sleep, Vaughn realized that for the first time in a very long time, he was in no hurry to leave. The following days fell into a pleasant routine. Each morning, Clara would help Vaughn to the parlor after breakfast, where he would read the newspapers she brought him or sometimes just watch her move about the house, completing her daily tasks with quiet efficiency. In the afternoons, she would go to the schoolhouse to teach, leaving him with books she thought he might enjoy simpler fare than her beloved novels, mostly accounts of exploration and adventure that he found surprisingly engrossing. On the 10th day of his convalescence, Clara returned from school to find Vaughn standing on the back porch, supporting himself with only a slight lean against the railing. He had dressed in his own clothes, clean trousers and a blue shirt that Sam had brought, and had even managed to shave, though the effort had left him more tired than he cared to admit. "Mr. Daniels," Clara exclaimed, setting down her books and rushing to his side. "You shouldn't be up without assistance." "Had to see if I could do it," he replied, offering a small smile at her concern. "Been cooped up too long." Clara frowned, but didn't insist he return to bed. Instead, she assessed him with a clinical eye. "Well, since you're already up, would you like to sit out here for a while? The fresh air might do you good." She helped him to a wooden chair, then disappeared inside, returning moments later with a quilt that she draped over his legs despite the mild spring afternoon. The small backyard was neat and well-tended, with a vegetable garden just beginning to show green shoots and several fruit trees in full bloom. "It's beautiful," Vaughn said, gesturing to the garden. Clara sat in the chair beside him, removing her bonnet and letting the gentle breeze play with tendrils of her copper hair. "Thank you." The garden was Robert's pride. "I've tried to maintain it as he would have wanted." She glanced at the neat rows. "Though I'll admit the vegetables are more practical than his beloved roses used to be." "Practical has its own kind of beauty," Vaughn observed. Clara smiled at that. "A very rancher-like philosophy, Mr. Daniels." "Vaughn," he said suddenly, "if I'm going to be convalescing in your home and garden, you might as well use my given name." A slight flush colored her cheeks. "That would hardly be proper. Nothing about this situation is conventional, Mrs. Calloway," he pointed out. "I think we're past standing on ceremony." She considered this, then nodded. "Very well. Vaughn." His name sounded different in her voice, somehow more substantial. "Then you must call me Clara." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching birds flit among the fruit blossoms. From somewhere down the street came the sounds of children playing, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Dr. Patterson says you're healing remarkably well," Clara said eventually. "He believes you could return to light duties at your ranch by the end of next week." Vaughn nodded, feeling an unexpected reluctance at the prospect of leaving. "That's good news." "Yes," Clara agreed, though he thought he detected a similar hesitation in her voice. "I'm sure your men will be glad to have you back. They've managed without me before." Vaughn turned to look at her profile, struck again by the quiet grace she possessed. "I've been thinking, Clara." She met his gaze, her expression open yet guarded. "Yes. I owe you a debt I can't possibly repay, not just for the nursing and shelter, but for—" He paused, searching for the right words. "For treating me like a person, not just a patient. For reading to me when the fever was bad. For making me feel welcome." "You owe me nothing," Clara said firmly. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Vaughn shook his head. "Not anyone. And not the way you did it." Clara looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. "It's been nice having someone in the house again, even under these circumstances." The admission seemed to cost her something, a small breach in the composed facade she maintained. Vaughn reached out, hesitated, then gently covered her clasped hands with his own. "When I'm well enough to ride," he said slowly, "I'd like to call on you. Properly. If that would be acceptable." Clara's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't withdraw her hands. "Vaughn," she paused, gathering her thoughts. "It's been a long time since I've thought of. That is, after Robert." "I understand," Vaughn said quickly, not wanting to pressure her. "It's been a long time for me too. Since I've thought of anyone that way." Clara studied his face, as if searching for something in his expression. Whatever she saw there seemed to reassure her. "Then yes," she said softly. "That would be acceptable." The smile that spread across Vaughn's face was genuine and unguarded, a rare expression for a man who had spent years keeping his emotions carefully in check. Something shifted between them in that moment, a door opening to possibilities neither had considered before a stray bullet brought them together. The next day brought an unexpected visitor to Clara's door. Marshal Frank Tillman, his weathered face serious beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "Mrs. Calloway," he greeted her with a respectful nod. "I need to speak with Daniels if he's up to it." Clara led him to the parlor, where Vaughn was sitting in an armchair, looking more like himself in his own clothes, though still thinner than he had been before the shooting. "Marshal," Vaughn acknowledged, gesturing to a chair. "What brings you by?" Tillman removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a nervous habit that immediately put Vaughn on alert. "Got some news you should hear," the lawman said, glancing briefly at Clara. "She can stay," Vaughn said, sensing the marshal's hesitation. "Whatever it is, Clara's earned the right to hear it." Tillman nodded. "It's about the Blackwell Gang. The 3 we captured are set to hang next week in Fort Smith." He paused, his expression grim. "But there's a problem. Seems there were 6 members, not 5 like we thought. The last one, Jeb Blackwell himself, wasn't in town during the shootout." Vaughn leaned forward despite the protest from his healing wounds. And he's been making noise in the saloons over in Tahlequah about settling scores. Word is he blames you specifically for his brother's deaths, Daniels. Tillman's eyes were apologetic but direct. "You were pretty visible during that firefight, and you did shoot one of the brothers." Clara had gone very still, her face pale. "Are you saying this man is coming after Vaughn?" "Can't say for certain, madam, but that's the rumor. I've sent wires to lawmen in the surrounding towns to be on the lookout, but Blackwell knows this territory well. Used to run with the younger gang before striking out on his own." Vaughn's jaw tightened. "I appreciate the warning, Marshal. There's more," Tillman said reluctantly. "Some of the talk mentioned something about making an example. Said something about anyone who helps Daniels being fair game too." Clara's hand flew to her throat, and Vaughn immediately reached for her, his expression hardening. "I've increased patrols around town," the marshal continued, "and I'll have a deputy keep an eye on your place, Mrs. Calloway. But I thought you should both know." After Tillman left, promising to return later with more information, a heavy silence filled the parlor. Clara moved to the window, drawing back the curtain to peer outside, as if expecting to see danger lurking in the street. "You should go back to your ranch," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear Vaughn could see in the set of her shoulders. "It's isolated, defensible. You'd be safer there." "And leave you here alone?" Vaughn stood, ignoring the twinge in his side. "Not a chance, Clara." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This is my fault. If I hadn't taken you in, then I'd likely be dead," Vaughn interrupted gently. "And Blackwell would still be looking for someone to blame." He moved to her side, placing his hands on her shoulders. "I won't let anything happen to you." "You're still healing," she protested. "You can barely walk across the room without tiring." "I'm stronger than I look," Vaughn assured her, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. 10 days of recovery had improved his condition, but he was far from his full strength. Clara studied his face, then seemed to come to a decision. "We need help," she said firmly. "I'm going to send a message to your foreman. If this Blackwell person is as dangerous as the marshal says, we can't face him alone." Vaughn nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her words. "Sam's a good man in a fight. But Clara," he added, taking her hand, "I don't want you involved in this. When Sam arrives, you should go stay with friends, perhaps in Fort Smith until this is over." The look she gave him then was so fierce it took him by surprise. "This is my home, Vaughn Daniels. I've already lost one husband to forces beyond my control. I will not be driven from my home by fear, nor will I abandon someone She stopped abruptly, color rising in her cheeks. "Someone you what?" Vaughn asked quietly, his heart quickening. Clara took a deep breath. "Someone I care about," she finished, her voice soft but resolute. "I may be a schoolteacher, but I'm not helpless. Robert taught me to shoot before he died. I can defend myself if needed." Vaughn looked at her with new eyes, seeing beyond the proper widow to the steel beneath. This was a woman who had faced loss and rebuilt her life through sheer determination, who had created a place for herself in a frontier town through intelligence and hard work. "All right," he conceded. "But we do this my way, and that means you follow my instructions if trouble comes." Clara nodded, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "Agreed. Now, I should write that note to your foreman." By nightfall, Vaughn had moved Clara's piano away from the parlor window and repositioned furniture to provide better cover if needed. Though his wounds protested the exertion, he felt better taking action rather than waiting passively for danger to find them. Clara prepared a simple supper, and they ate in near silence, both lost in their own thoughts. As she cleared the dishes, Vaughn checked his Colt revolver, ensuring it was loaded and functioning properly. "I have Robert's shotgun in the bedroom closet," Clara said, watching him from the kitchen doorway. "I keep it cleaned and loaded." Vaughn nodded appreciatively. "Bring it out." A shotgun's better for close quarters anyway. The evening stretched long before them, each creak of the house and distant sound from the street setting them on edge. Vaughn insisted Clara take the bedroom, while he kept watch from the parlor, his revolver within easy reach. "You need rest to heal," she protested, but he was adamant. "I've slept enough these past days to last me a lifetime," he said with a wry smile. "Go on. I'll wake you if there's any sign of trouble." Reluctantly, Clara retreated to her bedroom, though Vaughn doubted she would sleep much. He settled into a chair with a clear view of both the front door and the window facing the street, his body tense despite his outward calm. The hours crept by, marked only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional distant sounds of Muskogee's nightlife. The moon rose, casting silver light through the curtains and creating ghostly patterns on the floor. It was just past midnight when Vaughn heard the soft crunch of boots on gravel coming around the side of the house. He rose silently, wincing at the pull of his stitches, and moved to the wall beside the window. The footsteps paused at the back door, followed by the barely perceptible sound of metal against metal, someone trying the lock. Vaughn moved quickly down the hallway to Clara's room, opening the door without knocking. She was already awake, sitting up in bed with the shotgun across her lap. "Someone's trying to get in," she whispered, her face pale in the moonlight but composed. Vaughn nodded. "Back door. Stay here. Lock this door behind me." He started to turn away, but Clara caught his wrist. "Be careful," she said simply. Their eyes held for a moment, volumes passing between them without words. Then Vaughn gently freed his wrist and slipped back into the hallway, hearing the soft click of the lock behind him. He moved through the dark house with the practiced stealth of a man accustomed to tracking cattle through rough country. The back door handle turned slowly, then more insistently when it didn't yield. Vaughn positioned himself against the wall, Colt raised. A moment of silence followed, then the distinctive sound of breaking glass as someone smashed a small pane in the door to reach the lock from inside. Vaughn remained motionless, letting the intruder fumble with the lock and slowly push the door open. A figure slipped inside, tall and lean, with a bandana pulled up over the lower half of his face. The moonlight glinted off a revolver in his hand as he paused, allowing his eyes to adjust to the deeper darkness of the house. "That's far enough," Vaughn said evenly, cocking his pistol with an audible click. The intruder froze, then dove sideways as Vaughn fired, the bullet splintering the doorframe where the man's head had been a second earlier. The intruder returned fire from behind the kitchen table he'd upended for cover, the shots deafening in the confined space. Vaughn ducked back into the hallway as splinters flew from the wall beside him. His side burned where the sudden movement had torn at his healing wound, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay. "Daniels," the intruder shouted. "You killed my brothers. Your brothers tried to rob the bank and shot an unarmed man," Vaughn called back. "They got what was coming to them. And now you'll get yours," Blackwell snarled, firing again toward Vaughn's voice. The bullet passed through the thin wall, missing Vaughn by inches. He changed position, moving lower to the floor to present a smaller target. The sound of breaking glass from elsewhere in the house made his blood run cold. There was a second intruder. "Clara," he whispered, torn between maintaining his position and racing to her room. The decision was made for him when the blast of a shotgun shook the house, followed by a man's scream of pain. Vaughn used the distraction to roll across the hallway opening, firing twice at Blackwell's position. He heard a grunt and the clatter of a dropped weapon. "Jeb," called a panicked voice from elsewhere in the house. "She got me. The woman shot me." Seizing the moment, Vaughn surged forward into the kitchen, finding Blackwell clutching a bleeding arm as he scrambled for his fallen revolver. Vaughn kicked it away, keeping his Colt trained on the outlaw's head. "Don't move," he ordered, his voice deadly calm. Outside, shouts and running footsteps indicated that the gunfire had alerted the town. Relief flooded through Vaughn as he heard the marshal's distinctive voice calling for them to come out with their hands up. "It's Daniels," Vaughn shouted back. "Got Blackwell in here. There's another one somewhere inside, wounded." "Clara," he called, not taking his eyes off Blackwell. "I'm all right," came her steady response from down the hall. "He won't be using that hand to shoot anyone again." Minutes later, Marshal Tillman burst through the door with two deputies, quickly taking control of Blackwell while Vaughn rushed to Clara's room. He found her standing over a groaning man, the shotgun still leveled at his chest. Blood pooled on the floor from what remained of the intruder's right hand, mostly shot away by the close-range blast. "Clara," Vaughn breathed, moving to her side. Her face was ashen but composed, her hands steady on the weapon. "It's over. The marshal has them." Slowly, she lowered the shotgun, allowing Vaughn to take it from her grasp. Without the weapon to occupy them, her hands began to tremble. "You're hurt," she said suddenly, her eyes focusing on his side where a growing stain of red darkened his shirt. "Tore some stitches," Vaughn dismissed. "Nothing serious." He reached for her, and she stepped into his embrace, her composure finally cracking as she pressed her face against his chest. "I thought they would kill you," she whispered against his shirt. Vaughn held her tightly, his cheek resting against her hair. "Never. Not when I have something to live for." Dawn was breaking by the time the marshal finished taking their statements, and Dr. Patterson had restitched Vaughn's wound. Clara's home bore the scars of the night's violence: broken windows, bullet holes in walls, bloodstains on her clean floors, but she moved through it with a quiet determination, already planning repairs. "You should rest," Vaughn told her as she swept up broken glass from her kitchen floor. Clara shook her head. "I couldn't sleep now if I tried." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, Vaughn spotted Sam riding up with 3 of his ranch hands, all armed and looking grim. "Seems the cavalry has arrived," he said with a tired smile. "A bit late, but welcome nonetheless." Sam's relief at finding his boss alive was evident, though he frowned at Vaughn's freshly bandaged side. "Can't leave you alone for a minute," he muttered, then turned to Clara with genuine admiration. "Madam, the whole town's talking about how you held your own against Blackwell's man. That took real courage." Clara blushed slightly at the praise. "It was instinct more than courage, Mr. Reed." "Sam," Vaughn interjected, "I need you to arrange repairs for Mrs. Calloway's home. Whatever it costs, the Diamond D will cover it." "Already planning on it, boss," Sam replied with a knowing look between the two of them. "The boys and I can have those windows replaced by nightfall and start on the walls tomorrow." As Sam organized the ranch hands to begin work, Vaughn guided Clara to sit at her kitchen table, pouring her a cup of the strong coffee Sam had brought from the hotel. "Clara," he began, his voice low and serious. "Last night changed things." She looked up at him, fatigue etched in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Yes, it did. Not just the danger," Vaughn clarified, "though that made some things clearer than they might have been otherwise." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know we've only known each other a short while, but when I heard that second intruder in your home, when I thought you might be hurt." He paused, the emotion of the moment making words difficult. "I feel the same," Clara said softly, saving him from having to articulate the complex emotions swirling between them. "When the marshal said Blackwell was coming for you, I realized how quickly you've become important to me." Vaughn's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I meant what I said about calling on you properly when I'm well. But after last night, I'm not sure I want to wait that long to tell you how I feel." A small smile touched Clara's lips, bringing light to her tired eyes. "And how do you feel, Vaughn Daniels?" "Like a man who's been lost for a very long time and suddenly found his way home," he answered, the simple truth of it resonating in his voice. Clara's free hand rose to touch his cheek, her fingers gentle against his stubbled jaw. "Then perhaps you should stay a while longer." "For your recovery, of course." "Of course," Vaughn agreed, a smile breaking across his features. "Strictly for medical reasons." The following weeks brought healing of various kinds. Vaughn's wounds mended more completely under Clara's continued care, while her home was restored through the diligent work of the Diamond D Ranch hands. The broken glass and bullet holes disappeared, but something fundamental had changed within those walls. A house of quiet mourning had become something else entirely. Vaughn's daily presence in Clara's life evolved naturally from patient to friend to something deeper neither was quite ready to name aloud. They shared meals and conversations, discovered common interests despite their different backgrounds, and gradually revealed the layers of themselves they had long kept hidden from others. As spring gave way to early summer, Vaughn reluctantly prepared to return to his ranch. The calving season demanded his attention, and his extended absence had already placed too much burden on Sam and the others. The evening before his planned departure, He and Clara sat on her newly repaired back porch, watching fireflies rise from the garden as twilight descended. "I've been thinking," Vaughn said, breaking a comfortable silence. "The Diamond D is only 15 miles from town, not so far that I couldn't ride in regularly." Clara smiled, her hands busy with mending. "That would be nice. Or," he continued, his voice casual though his heart raced, "you could come visit the ranch sometimes. It's at its best this time of year, with the new calves and wildflowers covering the hills." She set her sewing aside, giving him her full attention. "I'd like that very much." Vaughn took a deep breath. "Clara, I know it's soon, perhaps too soon, but these past weeks have shown me what I've been missing all these years alone at the ranch." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small object that caught the last light of day. "This was my mother's. I've carried it with me since leaving Tennessee, though I never thought I'd have cause to use it." Clara's breath caught as she recognized the simple gold ring in his palm. "Vaughn, I'm not asking for an immediate answer," he said quickly. "I know you need time. That we both do. But I wanted you to know my intentions." He closed his fingers around the ring, suddenly uncertain. "If it's too soon after Robert—" "No," Clara interrupted softly. "It's been 4 years of mourning. Robert wouldn't have wanted that for me." She reached out, covering his closed hand with hers. "He would have liked you, I think. You're different men, but good in the same ways." Hope bloomed in Vaughn's chest. "Then you'll consider it? Being my wife?" Clara's smile was radiant in the gathering dusk. "I'll do more than consider it, Vaughn Daniels. My answer is yes." The surprise on his face made her laugh. "Did you think I would say no?" "I thought you might need more time," he admitted. "To be sure. I've had time enough," Clara said firmly. "Life is too unpredictable to waste it when you're certain about something important." She squeezed his hand. "And I am certain about you." Vaughn opened his hand, offering the ring again. This time, Clara took it, sliding it onto her finger where it nestled beside her first wedding band. "I'll always honor Robert's memory," she said, following his gaze to the 2 rings. "But my heart has room for a new love, too. I wouldn't have it any other way," Vaughn assured her, drawing her into his arms. Their kiss was gentle, yet full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. When they finally parted, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought them to this moment. "I never thought being shot would turn out to be the luckiest day of my life," he murmured, making her laugh. "Perhaps next time you could just introduce yourself like a normal person," Clara suggested, her eyes twinkling in the last light of day. "No need for a next time," Vaughn replied, kissing her again. "I plan to keep this love safe for a lifetime." The wedding took place in late September, when the summer heat had mellowed and the prairie grasses turned golden around Muskogee. It was a simple affair at the small church where Clara taught Sunday school, attended by the townspeople who had come to respect the quiet rancher during his convalescence, and the loyal hands from the Diamond D who had never seen their boss so genuinely happy. Clara wore a gown of ivory silk new, but not ostentatious, with wildflowers in her copper hair instead of a formal veil. Vaughn, standing at the altar in his best suit, watched her walk toward him with an expression of such naked adoration that several of the older women in attendance dabbed at their eyes. "Never thought I'd see the day," Sam whispered from his position as best man. "You were determined to be a hermit for life." "Plans change," Vaughn replied, unable to take his eyes off his bride. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, the couple's vows personally written and spoken with clear voices that carried to the back of the small church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vaughn's kiss was both reverent and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together. The reception was held in the town square, tables laden with food contributed by every family in Muskogee. Even Marshal Tillman unbent enough to offer a toast to the couple, remarking wryly that it had taken gunfire and near death to bring 2 of the most stubborn people in the territory together. As evening approached, Vaughn led Clara to a waiting carriage decorated with ribbons and flowers by the schoolchildren she taught. "Ready to see your new home, Mrs. Daniels?" he asked, helping her into the seat. Clara's smile was radiant as she settled her skirts. "I've been ready since the day you proposed." The Diamond D Ranch spread across rolling hills 15 miles outside Muskogee, its boundaries marked by stands of oak and cottonwood trees. The main house, originally a modest cabin, had been expanded over the years into a comfortable 2-story home with wide porches and large windows that captured the magnificent views of the surrounding countryside. Vaughn had spent the weeks before the wedding making improvements with Clara in mind: new curtains at the windows, comfortable furniture in the parlor, and bookshelves built by his own hands to house her beloved collection. The bedroom had been completely renovated, the old Spartan furnishings replaced with a large four-poster bed and a dressing table by the window where morning light would illuminate her reflection. As the carriage approached along the tree-lined drive, Clara gasped at the sight of lanterns hung from every branch, creating a magical pathway to welcome her home. "The men did that," Vaughn said, pleased by her reaction. "Their wedding gift to us." The ranch hands had tactfully made themselves scarce, moving temporarily to the bunkhouse farther from the main house to give the newlyweds privacy. Only Sam remained on the porch to welcome them, holding the horses as Vaughn lifted Clara down from the carriage. "Everything's ready inside, boss," Sam said with a grin. "Congratulations again, Mrs. Daniels. You've got yourself a good man, stubborn as he is." "Thank you, Sam," Clara replied warmly, "for everything you've done to help make this happen." With a tip of his hat, Sam mounted his horse and rode toward the bunkhouse, leaving the couple alone on the porch of their home. "Tradition says I should carry you across the threshold," Vaughn said, eyeing the steps dubiously. His wounds had healed well, but such exertion might still be unwise. Clara laughed, linking her arm through his. "Let's start our own traditions. We'll walk in together, as equals." Vaughn's smile was full of tenderness as he opened the door. "As equals, then?" Together they stepped into the house no longer his. But there's beginning the next chapter of a story that had started with a gunshot and a woman reading beside a bed. Over the months that followed, Clara transformed the Diamond D from a functional rancher's home into a true haven. Her books found places on the shelves Vaughn had built. Her piano was moved from her house in town to the parlor, and her gardening skills soon had flowers blooming around the house, where only prairie grass had grown before. Vaughn watched these changes with quiet pleasure, finding in his wife's presence a completion he hadn't known he was missing. The solitude he had once cherished gave way to the joy of shared meals, evening conversations by the fire, and the simple comfort of falling asleep with Clara in his arms. The ranch prospered under their combined care. Vaughn's practical knowledge of cattle and land management complemented Clara's organizational skills and education. She kept the ranch's books with meticulous precision, implemented a filing system for important documents, and even began teaching the younger ranch hands to read and cipher during the winter months, when work was less demanding. Spring brought news that filled both their hearts with wonder and trepidation. Clara was expecting their first child. The announcement was met with celebration throughout the ranch, with Sam declaring himself the child's honorary uncle before anyone else could claim the title. "Are you happy?" Vaughn asked one evening as they sat on the porch swing he had built, his hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her stomach. Clara covered his hand with hers, leaning into his embrace. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" "Beyond words," Vaughn admitted. "Though I worry sometimes that you'll be a good father?" Clara finished for him. "You needn't. I've seen how you are with the young hands on the ranch, teaching and guiding without crushing their spirit. You'll be wonderful." Vaughn pressed a kiss to her temple. "What did I do to deserve you?" "You saved 2 children in a shootout," Clara reminded him with a smile. "And then had the good sense to get shot so I could find you." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her ear. "I'll try to be less dramatic in my devotion going forward." "Please do," Clara agreed. Once was quite enough. Their son, Daniel Robert Daniels, arrived on a crisp October morning in 1882, with Dr. Patterson attending and the women from neighboring ranches assisting. The boy had Vaughn's strong features and Clara's thoughtful eyes, a combination that promised both strength and sensitivity. Vaughn paced the porch throughout Clara's labor, wearing a path in the boards until Sam threatened to tie him to a chair if he didn't stop. When Dr. Patterson finally emerged to announce the birth of a healthy boy, Vaughn nearly collapsed with relief. "She's asking for you," the doctor said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Fine work, both of you." Vaughn entered their bedroom with reverent steps, his eyes immediately finding Clara propped against pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Vaughn approached the bed as if in a dream, sitting carefully beside his wife. When she placed the infant in his arms, the fierce surge of love that overcame him was unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Hello, Daniel," he whispered, one finger gently tracing the perfect curve of his son's cheek. "Welcome to the world, little man." Looking up at Clara, his eyes shining with unshed tears, Vaughn found himself unable to speak the depth of his emotions. But Clara understood, as she always did, reaching out to touch his face with tender fingers. "I know," she said simply. "I feel it too." As the seasons passed, the Diamond D flourished, as did the family that called it home. Daniel grew from infant to toddler, his curious nature and infectious laugh bringing joy to everyone on the ranch. Clara resumed teaching in town 2 days a week, bringing Daniel with her to the delight of her students, who adored their teacher's son. In the spring of 1884, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Clare, completing their family circle. Vaughn, once the most self-contained man in the territory, found himself happily surrounded by the noise and activity of family life. Daniel's endless questions, Elizabeth's sweet gurgles, Clara's piano playing in the evenings. The schoolhouse in Muskogee eventually gave way to a proper school building, with Clara as its principal and head teacher. Under her guidance, education in the growing town expanded to include not just the basics but literature, science, and music. Vaughn supported her work completely, proud of the difference his wife made in the community. The Diamond D itself became known throughout the territory not just for its fine cattle, but for its progressive practices. Vaughn implemented new breeding techniques, expanded into horses as well as cattle, and treated his workers with a respect uncommon in the often harsh ranching business. Men sought employment there knowing they would be paid fairly and treated well. On quiet evenings, when the children were finally asleep and the day's work complete, Vaughn and Clara would often sit on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge over the rolling hills of their land. Sometimes they would reminisce about their unusual beginning, a gunfight, a sickbed, a woman reading beside a wounded cowboy. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been in town that day?" Clara asked one such evening, her head resting on Vaughn's shoulder. "Sometimes," he admitted, his arm tightening around her. "But then I think it was always meant to be, one way or another. If not that day, then another." Clara smiled at his uncharacteristic philosophy. Rather romantic thinking for a practical rancher. "You've changed me," Vaughn said simply. "For the better, I hope." "We've changed each other," Clara corrected, taking his hand and lacing their fingers together. "That's what love does, I think. It doesn't just add to your life, it transforms it." Vaughn nodded, watching the fireflies rise from the garden Clara had planted, much like they had on the night he proposed. "I never knew what I was missing until I found you," he said quietly. "All those years alone on this ranch, thinking I was content." "You were," Clara said gently, "just as I was in my quiet life in town. But contentment isn't the same as joy." She turned her face up to his. "And joy is what we've found together." Vaughn kissed her then, with all the tenderness and passion that had only deepened over their years together. When they parted, he looked into her eyes, the same sage green that had captivated him when he first awoke to find her reading beside his bed. "I love you, Clara Daniels," he said, the words simple but profound. "And I love you, Vaughn Daniels," she replied, her smile as bright as the day he'd proposed. Now and always. From inside the house came the soft cry of their daughter, waking for her evening feeding. Clara rose from the swing, pressing one more kiss to Vaughn's lips before going to tend their child. Vaughn remained on the porch a moment longer, watching the lights of his home glow warmly against the gathering darkness. Once, he had thought himself complete in his solitude. Now he knew better. True completion had come not from the land or the ranch he'd built, but from the family that filled it with life and love. It had begun with a random moment of violence, a cowboy shot in a crossfire, but had blossomed into something beautiful beyond imagining. As Vaughn finally rose to join his wife and children inside, he said a silent prayer of gratitude for the bullet that had changed his life. In the frontier territory where men often died for less, he had found not death, but life in its fullest measure, all because he woke to a woman reading beside his bed.